The View from Saturday, Act 2, Scene 1, as read by Ben.
The contest had warmed up, and so had Mrs. Olenski. From her seat on the aisle she waited. On her left sat Dr. Roy Clayton Romer, the district superintendent for Clarion County. Both Dr. Romer and Mrs. Olenski paid strict attention to the commissioner, the man at the podium. There could be no mistake. This was the man of the hour, king for the day. He wore a navy blue, precision-fit pinstriped suit and a white on dazzling white shirt. An edge of his French cuffs showed beneath his jacket sleeves. Mrs. Olenski was not sure how much the correct amount was, but she knew that if she put a spirit level Mrs. Olenski was not sure how much the correct amount was, but she knew that if she put a spirit level to his, they would be exactly right. The French cuffs were held together with onyx cuff links, and his collar was tied with a red-striped power necktie. The television lights beamed down on his crown of hair, which was tinted the color of peach pits. He was dressed, brushed, coiffed, and blow-dried, not just to be seen, but to be looked at. Dr. Romer would not take his eyes off the man at the podium, and Mrs. Olenski thought of Alice in Wonderland. "Don't look at me like that," said the king to the Cheshire Cat. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. Mrs. Olenski wanted to tell Dr. Romer that a cat may look at a king, but why bother? The audience was not permitted to speak. After the Souls had won the Epiphany Middle School Championship, Dr. Roy Clayton Romer paid a visit to Mrs. Olenski and asked, guess what? Why had she chosen this team? She still did not know, and wouldn't until after it was all over, but by that time the success of the Souls, even if she did not yet know that they were the Souls, had made Mrs. Olenski less timid. Dr. Romer had announced that he had just completed a 3-day workshop on multiculturalism for educators. Mrs. Olenski had always been amused by educators who call themselves educators. So, when he asked her how she had chosen the 4 members of her academic team, Mrs. Olenski knitted her brow and answered with hushed seriousness. "In the interest of diversity," she said, "I chose a brunette, a redhead, a blonde, and a kid with hair as black as print on paper." Dr. Romer was not amused. He gave Mrs. Olenski a capsule lecture on what multiculturalism really means. "Oh," she said, "then we're still safe, Dr. Romer. You can tell the taxpayers that the Epiphany Middle School team has 1 Jew, 1 half-Jew, a WASP, and an Indian." "Jews, half-Jews, and WASPs have nothing to do with diversity, Mrs. Olenski. The Indian does, but we don't call them Indians anymore. We call them Native Americans." "Not this one," she replied. "Mrs. Olenski," Dr. Romer asked, "would you like it if people called you a cripple?" Mrs. Olenski gave up. Everyone believed that she could be wounded by the word cripple. She could never explain to Dr. Romer, nor would she try to, that the word itself does not hurt, but the manner of its delivery can. For all of his training, Dr. Romer would never believe that cripples themselves are a diverse group, and some make jokes. Nadia was the redhead of Mrs. Olenski's diverse group. Had she been born 500 years sooner, Raphael would have chosen her as a model for his cherubs. Tendrils of bright red hair framed her face, a spray of freckles powdered her nose, and she was plump and as perfectly ripened peach. Raphael probably would have painted out the freckles, and that would have been a mistake, like brushing the cinnamon off cinnamon toast. For the next few weeks of the new school year, Nadia hardly spoke. For the first few weeks of the new school year, Nadia hardly spoke. All the 6th graders, like Mrs. Olenski herself, were new to Epiphany Middle School, but Nadia, like Mrs. Olenski herself, seemed most disconnected. Both were watchers and waiters, cautious about being friendly, about showing themselves.
Cleo is too.
Then on the middle Monday in October, Nadia Diamondstein arrived in class with a smile and addressed her teacher. Don't you think, Mrs. Olinsky, that autumn is the most glorious time of year? Mrs. Olinsky confessed that it was her favorite season and told Nadia that she sometimes felt guilty because she thought she ought to prefer spring with the pledge to make the lilies bloom again. Every morning thereafter, Nadia smiled as she entered class and greeted Mrs. Olinsky with a word from her southern past. She said, "Hey." Mrs. Olinsky knew that Nadia Diamondstein was not only incandescently beautiful, but was also a star. The Commissioner of Education picked up the next question. Looking over the rims of his reading glasses, he slowly unfolded the paper. "This question has 2 parts, he said. To receive credit, you must answer both parts." Lowering his eyes, he read, "What is the name given to that portion of the North Atlantic Ocean that is noted for its abundance of seaweed? And what is its importance to the ecology of our planet?" Nadia Diamondstein rang in.
Act 2, Scene 2. Nadia tells of turtle love. My grandfather is a slim person of average height with heavy, heathery gray eyebrows. He lives in a high-rise condominium on the beach in Florida, and he lives there with his new wife, whom he calls Margie. I was told to call her Margaret, not Aunt Margaret or Mrs. Diamondstein. It sounded disrespectful to me, calling a woman old enough to be my grandmother by her first name, but I did as I was told. Last summer, just before my grandfather married Margaret, my mother and father got divorced, and Mother moved the 2 of us to upstate New York, where she had grown up. She said she needed some autumn in her life. I had never thought I would see autumn in New York or anywhere else, because even when we vacationed in a place that had one, we always had to return from school before it started. In Florida, school starts before Labor Day. Whatever it says on the calendar, Florida has de facto summer. Dividing up my time was part of the divorce settlement. I was to spend Thanksgiving, spring vacation, and 1 month over the summer with Dad. He left Christmas holidays for Mother because it's her holiday, not his. I am the product of a mixed marriage. In the first summer of their separation, Dad chose August for his visitation rights. He picked us up early Friday evening. Us means Ginger and me. Ginger is my dog. I do not know who was happier to see me at the airport, Dad or Ginger. The worst part of the trip had been checking Ginger into the baggage compartment. Dad always was a nervous person, but since the divorce he had become terminally so. He was having a difficult time adjusting to being alone. He had sold the house that we lived in when we were a family and moved into a swinging singles apartment complex. But my father could no more swing than a gate on rusty hinges. For the first day and a half after I arrived, Dad hovered over me like a Goodyear blimp over the Orange Bowl. He did not enjoy the hovering, and I did not enjoy being hovered, but he didn't know what to do with me, and I didn't know what to tell him except to tell him to stop hovering, which seemed to be the only thing he knew how to do. On Sunday, we went to see Grandpa Izzy and Margaret. Grandpa Izzy was happy to see me. Under those bushy eyebrows of his, Grandpa Izzy's eyes are bright blue like the sudden underside of a birdwing. His eyes have always been the most alive part of him, but when Bubby Frida died, they seemed to die too. Since he married Margaret, though, they seem bright enough to give off light of their own. He's 69 years old, and he is in love. Margaret is a short blonde. She's very different from my Bubby, but not very different from the thousands who make their home in South Florida. There are so many blonde widows in the state of Florida, and they are all so much alike, they ought to have a kennel breed named and registered for them. Like all the others, Margaret dresses atrociously. She wears pastel-colored pantsuits with elastic waists or white slacks with overblouses of bright, bold prints. She carries her eyeglasses, they are blue-rimmed bifocals, on a metal chain around her neck. They all do. Margaret is not fat, but she certainly is not slim. She is thick around the middle, and when she wears her green polyester pantsuit, she looks like a Granny Smith apple. Grandpa Izzy would say delicious. Grandpa Izzy and Margaret are like Jack Sprat could eat no fat and his wife could eat no lean. Grandpa Izzy says that Margaret is zaftig, which is Yiddish for pleasantly plump. Everything about her pleases him. He seems to find it difficult to keep himself from pinching her, or pinching himself for having had the good fortune to find and marry her. Such public displays of affection can be embarrassing to a prepubescent girl like me who is not accustomed to being in the company of 2 married people who like each other. On Sunday, we went out for brunch at one of those mammoth places where the menu is small and the portions are large, and every senior citizen leaves with a styrofoam box containing leftovers, and we had to wait to be seated at the restaurant because Sunday brunch is a major social custom in Florida retirement communities. Dad twice asked the restaurant hostess how much longer we would have to wait. Grandpa Izzy and Margaret tried to tell Dad that they didn't mind waiting, since visiting with each other was part of the plan, and they didn't mind doing it at the restaurant. But hovering at low altitude seemed to be my father's new best thing. When we were finally seated, we had a nice enough time. Margaret had Belgian waffles and did not require a styrofoam box for leftovers because there were none. She ate everything on her plate. She did not order decaf coffee. Margaret was not at all curious about me. I thought she would want to know how I liked our new home, which is in Epiphany, the very town she lived in before she moved to Florida. Maybe she thought I was not curious about her because I did not ask her about her wedding, which neither Mother nor I attended. But I believe that the grown-ups should ask the questions first. And besides, Mother and I had gotten a full report on the wedding from Noah Gershom, who, due to unforeseen circumstances, had been best man. I did not find Noah's account of the events surrounding his becoming best man quite as amusing as he did. But for several complicated reasons, I did not express my opinion. One of the complications was that my mother works for Dr. Gershom, who is Noah's father. My mother is a dental hygienist by profession, and Dr. Gershom is a dentist. One of the reasons we moved to Epiphany was that Mother got a job there. My mother happens to be an excellent hygienist, and Dr. Gershom was lucky to get her. But nevertheless, I thought it best not to tell Noah Gershom that his account of my grandfather's wedding was not as amusing as he thought it was.
Dad's new apartment complex was miles away from our old neighborhood. I called 2 of my former friends, but getting together with them was not easy. Our schedules, which had once matched, seemed to be in different time zones now. Geography made the difference. When we finally got together, I thought we would have fun. We did not. Either I had changed, or they had changed, or all of us had. I would not try again. I concluded that many friendships are born and maintained for purely geographical reasons. I preferred Ginger. Work seemed to be the only thing that held Dad together, but leaving me alone that week while he went to the office made him feel guilty and ended up making him even more nervous, if such a thing were possible. I spent part of my time in the apartment complex pool, which was almost empty during the day. I read and watched talk shows and took Ginger on walks around the golf course that bordered the swinging singles complex. I enjoyed not having Dad hover over me, but I did not tell him so. Grandpa Izzy called every day. He volunteered to come to swinging singles to pick me up after Dad left for work and after the morning rush hour traffic. All the retirees in South Florida wait for the rush hour traffic to be over so that when they go out on the highways, they can create their own rush hour. But I declined. Then, on Thursday, after I had the unsatisfactory visit with my former friends, Grandpa Izzy called with a different suggestion. He asked Dad to drop me off at their place in the morning before he went to work. Margaret's grandson, Ethan, who was my age, had arrived, and Grandpa Izzy thought a visit would be good for both of us. I thought he meant Ethan and me, but maybe he meant Dad and me, because after he took the call, the look on my dad's face was a new way to spell relief. My only requirement was that I be allowed to bring Ginger. A lot of retirement high-rises have rules against dogs, visiting or otherwise, and I did not know Margaret's position on dogs. Grandpa Izzy said that Ginger would not be a problem. Of course, she never was. Ginger is a genius. I did not know if I was developing an interest in boys or if I would have washed my hair and put on my new blouse anyway. Perhaps I was leaving prepubescence and was entering full pubescence, or perhaps I was simply curious about Ethan. For example, why had Margaret said nothing about his coming when we had seen each other at Sunday's brunch? Margaret had mentioned having a grandson who was my age, but she said very little about him. Most grandmothers of her species carry a coffee table-sized photo album in their tote bag-sized pocketbooks. Either Margaret was a rare subspecies of grandmother, or her grandson Ethan had done something strange to his hair. When grandmothers disapprove of grandsons, it's usually their hair, their music, or both. She must have known about his visit for at least 2 weeks, because everybody I know has to buy airline tickets that far in advance to get the discount.
Grandpa Izzy's high-rise retirement condominium was 3 towns north of Dad's swinging singles apartment complex. The highway between them is bumper to bumper. Dad misjudged the time it would take to get there, so we did not arrive until after they had left for their morning walk. Dad gave me a key. I let myself in. There was a note on the refrigerator door saying they had gone for their turtle walk and to make myself at home. The note was in Margaret's handwriting. No mistaking her U's for N's or her I's for E's. Margaret's handwriting was the smooth, round style used by the older generation of school teachers, which is exactly what Margaret was before she became an elementary school principal, which is what she was before she retired. Ginger and I waited on the balcony and watched the three of them approach. Ethan appeared to be almost as tall as Margaret and almost as blonde, but not for the same reason. From the distance of the balcony, it was the third floor. He appeared to be a healthy prepubescent. Of course, except for my father, appearances do not always tell much about a person's nervous condition. The three of them were very excited when they returned. Even though Ethan is Margaret's grandson, it was Grandpa who introduced me because Margaret did not. She went straight to the desk to dig a record book out of the drawer. "Ethan's lucky," Grandpa said. "Only his second day here, and this evening we'll be digging out one of our nests." He was talking about turtle nests. Turtles had brought Grandpa and Margaret together.
The year after Buba Frida had died, Grandpa Izzy sold their little house and moved to Century Village. For the next 2 years, early every morning, before the day got too hot, he drove to the beach where he took a walk. Many people from Century Village walked to the beach where there was a sidewalk with markers for every half mile. A year ago, last spring, he noticed a blonde Saftig woman who was returning about the same time he was leaving, so he began starting out earlier and earlier until one day they started out together. He introduced himself and asked her if she would like to take a walk with him. She replied by inviting him to join her on her turtle walk. He accepted, not even knowing where or what it was, and they had been doing it together ever since. Margaret was checking in her record book. "We moved 107 eggs," she said. "We feel very protective of the nests we move," Grandpa explained to Ethan, who nodded as if he understood what Grandpa was talking about, leading me to believe that they had already explained turtles to him. Sea turtles need beaches, of which Florida has many miles. All up and down the coastline, female turtles come out of the ocean and paddle their way across the sand, dig a hole, and lay eggs, about 100 at a time. They use their flippers first to dig the hole, and then to scoop the sand back over it before returning to the sea. The female will lay 3 to 5 clutches of eggs during a season, return to the water, and not come out of the water again for 2 or 3 years, when she is ready to lay again. About 55 days after being laid, the eggs hatch. From the 1st of May, when the first eggs get laid, until Halloween night, when the last of them hatches, turtle patrols walk assigned stretches of the beach. Members of a turtle patrol are trained to recognize the flipper marks that the mother turtle makes. About half the time, the mother turtle lays her eggs in a dangerous place, where the eggs might get washed out because they are within the high tide line, or where they might get trampled by people or run over by cars. Turtle eggs are a gourmet feast of birds, big fish, and especially raccoons. People approved by the Department of Environmental Protection are allowed to move the nests to safer grounds. They post a stake with a sign over all the nests they find, the ones they move and the ones they do not, saying that it's against the law to disturb the nest. If you do, you can be fined up to $50,000 and or go to jail for a year. The signs, which are bright yellow, make it very clear that this is an and/or situation. Loggerheads are a threatened species. That means that they are not as seriously missing as endangered, but almost. Last year, encouraged by Grandpa Izzy, I did my science report on Florida turtles. We studied together. We accompanied Margaret on her turtle walks. I called her Mrs. Draper then. I never guessed that only months later we would become almost related. I got an A. Grandpa got permitted. Margaret had been permitted when they met. I saved my report. I had begun it by asking, "Do you think it's harder to name Mr. Walter Disney's 7 dwarfs, or to name all 5 of the species of turtle that migrate off the coast of Florida?" My grandfather thought that was a wonderful way to begin a report. I had drawn a cover that had shown all 5 kinds: loggerheads, greens, leatherbacks, hawksbill, and Kemp's Ridley. My teacher commented on my cover, saying that it was exceptional.
How are you spelling Kemp's Ridley? KEMP''SRIDLEY. 2 words. Okay.
2 words. I saved the report because I thought I would draw a different cover, one showing a map of Florida beaches, and use it again in 6th grade when we were required to do a Florida history report. I did not know then that when I started 6th grade, I would be living in the state of divorce and New York. Grandpa Izzy said, "Why don't you stay, Nadia? You've always enjoyed watching a nest being dug out. Ethan's coming." He looked over at Ethan, inviting him to reinforce the invitation. Ethan nodded slightly. "It'll be like old times," Grandpa said. How could my Grandpa Izzy even begin to think that our digging out a nest would be like old times? In old times, which were not so very long ago, I would have enjoyed, even been excited about digging out a turtle nest. In old times, Margaret would still be Mrs. Draper, and I would neither know nor care that she had a grandson, Ethan. "When will this happen?" I asked. "After sunset, as usual," Grandpa replied, looking at me curiously, for he knew I knew. "Oh, that's too bad," I said. "Dad is picking me up before supper, and he will be disappointed if I do not eat with him." Grandpa said that he would call Dad at work and have him stop over so that he, too, could watch. And before I could tell them the real truth, that I would rather not attend at all, they had Dad on the telephone and everything was arranged. I was not angry, but I was seriously annoyed.
That afternoon, the four of us went to the pool. I had to leave Ginger back at the apartment because dogs were not allowed at poolside. I had not brought my bathing suit, so I had to sit by the pool while the others swam. Margaret said that she was sorry, but that she did not have a bathing suit to lend me. "I don't think mine will fit," she said. I think she was attempting to make a joke because she smiled when she said it. I do not know who, beside Margaret herself, any bathing suit of hers would fit. My Bubby's bathing suit never got wet, and Margaret did 42 laps. My Bubby and Margaret are very different. Ethan practiced a few dives. Grandpa coached him. Then they came and sat by me. I was curious to know if Ethan's trip had been planned long before they announced it. I asked him if they had changed planes in Atlanta. He said that he had. "On my flight out of Atlanta, there were 7 unaccompanied minors," I said. He smiled. "There were only 5 on mine. I guess I was a little late in the season." "Did you have an advance reservation?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "Why do you ask?" "I was just wondering," I said. I did not tell him what I was wondering about. "When you travel with a pet," I added, "you must plan in advance. The worst part of my trip was worrying about Ginger. She had to fly as baggage. We were advised to tranquilize her and put her in a dog carrier, and Ginger had never been tranquilized before, and she has been dopey all week. She is just now getting back to her real self, and I promised her that I will not do that again." How will you get her back?" "I'm going to talk to her and tell her to be quiet so I do not have to tranquilize her." "Maybe you just gave her too strong a dose." "Maybe, but I do not care to experiment. She will make the trip just fine. Ginger is a genius." Someone's written a book about the intelligence of animals. Border collies are the smartest. Ginger would not be listed. She is a mixed breed, like me. What's your mix? "I am half Jewish, half Protestant." "That's good," he said. "Like corn. It's called hybrid vigor." I took that as a compliment, but I did not thank him for it. "Are you a hybrid?" I asked. "Not at all. The only claim my family has to hybridization is right there," he said, pointing to Margaret. "Grandma Draper is a thoroughbred Protestant, and Izzy's a thoroughbred Jew. But they don't plan on breeding." I think I blushed.
Margaret was in charge of 15 permitted volunteers. That means that if she could not do the turtle patrol, one of them could. Permitted volunteers were licensed to move a nest or dig out a nest after the eggs had hatched, but they had to be supervised by her. All 15 of Margaret's permitted, plus friends and other interested parties, showed up for the digging out. As soon as other beach walkers saw the hovering over the nest, they joined in. The audience was enthusiastic. They oohed and awed, and at least once every 3 minutes, one way or another, someone said that nature was wonderful. 4 people said fascinating. Ethan did not ooh or ah, and he did not say fascinating. He watched as patiently as a cameraman from National Geographic. My father hovered with the rest of them and said fascinating twice. Hovering had become his great recreational pastime. Turtle patrols keep very close watch on the nests on their stretches of beach, and they know when they are ripe for hatching, and sometimes they're lucky enough to be there when the turtle nests are emerging. This is what a hatching is called. When the turtles push their way out of the sand and start waddling toward the water's edge, they look like a bunch of wind-up toys escaped from Toys R Us. Watching a nest hatch is more interesting than digging one out after they've hatched, which is really only a matter of keeping inventory and making certain that everything that was or is living is cleared out. During old times, I had oohed and awed at the digging out, but that evening it seemed as exciting as watching a red light change. Like a proud parent, Margaret watched as Grandpa Izzy dug out the nest. Wearing a rubber glove on his hand, he reached down into the nest as far as his armpit. He removed 96 empty eggshells, 4 unbatched whole eggs, 1 dead hatchling, 3 turtles that were half in, half out of the shell but were dead. Those are called dead-pipped. 1 turtle that was half in, half out of the shell but was alive. Those are called live-pipped. 2 live ones. Margaret took notes, counted again, and said at last that it all added up. Grandpa released the 2 live turtles onto the sand. Everyone lined up on either side of them as they made their way to the water's edge. Turtles almost always hatch at night, and after they do, they head toward the light. Normally, the light they head for is the horizon on the ocean. However, if a hotel or high-rise along the ocean leaves its lights on, the turtles will head toward the brighter lights of civilization and never make it to the ocean. They do not find food, and they die. Turtles are not trainable animals. Their brains are in the range of mini to micro. When the 2 hatchlings reached the water, everyone along the parade route applauded, and my father said fascinating for the 3rd time. Back at the nest, Margaret examined the live pipped. She announced, "I've decided to keep it." Judge, jury, and defending attorney. Dad asked what would happen to it, and Margaret explained, "It'll take a few days to straighten itself out. We'll give it a safe, cool, dark place in the utility room and release it after sunset when it's ready." Dad could have asked me. I did get an A on that report.
When baby turtles come out of their shells, which are round, about the same size as a golf ball, they are squinched up into a round shape that fits inside the eggs. After they break through the shell, they spend 3 days down in the sand hole straightening themselves out. Sometimes they die before they make it out of the shell. Those are the dead-pipped. They are counted and discarded with the unhatched and the empties. A permitted person has to decide if the live-pipped are more alive than dead. If the decision is that they stand a good chance of surviving, they need care. They are lifted from the nest and taken home and given shelter until they straighten themselves out, and then they are released onto the sand.
"We never carry them to the water," Margaret explained. "They must walk across the native sand. We think that something registers in their brains that kicks in 25 years later because they return to the beach where they were born to lay their eggs." As Margaret was explaining this, I thought about my mother's returning to New York. Her birthday is September 12th, and I wondered if her need to return to autumn in New York had anything to do with some switch that had been turned on when she emerged.
Back at the condo, Grandpa carried the bucket containing the live pipped into the utility room, and we all sat down to have milk and cookies. Oreos. Bubby would have had homemade rugelach. Margaret didn't even know what rugelach were until Grandpa Izzy took her to a kosher delicatessen and introduced her to them. She already knew about bagels because bagels have become popular even in places that have never heard of them. Margaret liked rugelach, but I could tell she had no intention of learning how to make them. Grandpa Izzy, who had enjoyed rugelach and babka as much as anyone else, had adjusted to Entenmann's and Oreos. I asked Ethan if he knew rugelach. He did not. Knowing rugelach is a hybrid adventure. Also Jewish. You can just be straight up Jewish and know rugelach. We should make rugelach again. Yeah. They're very good. Before the evening was over, Grandpa Izzy suggested that Dad bring me back early enough so that I could take the morning turtle walk with him and Margaret and Ethan. And then Margaret said,
"Alan, why don't you come too? The exercise will be good for your foot."
Dad had broken his foot on the day of their wedding, and it had not yet healed. Margaret believed that a bad mental attitude had slowed it down. Much to my surprise, Dad agreed. "What about Ginger?" I asked. "No problem," Grandpa Izzy said. "Just keep her on a leash like old times." I started to say that Ginger had grown to hate the leash, but once again a look on Dad's face told me something, so I said nothing. So it was from a look of Dad's and a sentence left unspoken that the sequel to the turtle habit got started. Dad and I would leave his apartment early, meet Margaret, Grandpa, and Ethan on the beach, and do our walk. And then Dad would return to Grandpa's and change into his business suit and leave for work, and if time permitted, Dad would join us for breakfast. If not, the four of us would eat without him. We usually watched the rest of the Today Show before going for a swim. Grandpa and Ethan got into an unofficial contest about how many laps they could do. I did not participate. I took a short swim, got out of the water, sat on the sidelines, and read while Grandpa was teaching Ethan how to dive. He wanted to teach me too, but I preferred not to. One afternoon, we went to the movies. It was blazing hot and bright outside. We went into the movies where it was cool and dark, and then we came back out into the bright hot sun, and I felt as if I had sliced my afternoon into thirds like a ribbon sandwich. Ethan, who never said much, had a lot to say about the camera angles and the background music and described the star's performance as subtle. Never before in all my life had I heard a boy use the word subtle.
Dad had tickets for the Phantom of the Opera. This was the real Broadway show, except that it was the road company. Not knowing that Ethan would be visiting, he had bought only 4. As soon as he found out that Ethan would be in town, he started calling the ticket office to buy one more, but there were none to be had. He kindly volunteered to give up his ticket, but Grandpa Izzy and Margaret would not hear of it. Margaret said that she would stay home, and Grandpa Izzy said that he didn't want to go if she didn't. I expected Ethan to do the polite thing and say that he would stay home, but of course he did not. Of course, Ethan usually said nothing. Even when it was appropriate to say something, Ethan could be counted on to say nothing. But on the subject of who should give up a ticket, Ethan was particularly silent, which was a subtle hint that he really wanted to go. At the very last minute, the problem was solved. One of Dad's clients mentioned that he had an extra ticket, and Dad bought it from him on the spot. We met at the theater. Ian had insisted upon taking the odd seat, saying he would be fine. The odd seat was 3 rows in front of ours and closer to the center of the stage, but I do not think Ethan knew it at the time. I think he wanted to be alone, or I should say, without us. At intermission, Ethan bought one of the $10 souvenir programs, and after the show, he thanked my dad at least 5 times for getting him a ticket. Dad was pleased with the way the evening had turned out. We went to the Rascal House for ice cream sundaes after the show. Ethan could hardly keep himself from thumbing through his $10 program. His head must have swayed back to the theater long after we left, for when the waitress asked for his order, he said, "They must have had more trapdoors on that stage than a magic act." My father actually hummed as he looked over the menu, and then right after we placed our orders, he dropped his bombshell. He asked Margaret if he could be listed on her permit. He would like to be able to substitute for her or Grandpa Izzy. His apartment house was not far from a beach, he explained, and he would transfer to someone's permit there after I went back north. Then he would like to train so that he could head up a turtle patrol. His goal was to get licensed. "Like father, like son," he said, patting Grandpa Izzy on the back. Margaret said, "We'll get the process started tomorrow." She must have been quite proud of her loggerheads. They got her my grandpa, and now they got her my dad. I did not care. I had Ginger. I preferred animals with fur and some measure of intelligence. Ginger had grown sleek and muscular with our long turtle walks. She was more affectionate than ever. For example, when we got back to the apartment after the Phantom of the Opera, she greeted me as if I were the best friend she had ever had. Inside me, there was a lot of best friendship that no one but Ginger was using.
The day after Dad dropped his bombshell, he and Ethan, Margaret, and Grandpa walked the beach together, a tight 3-generation foursome. They got ahead of Ginger and me, and I made no effort to catch up. Instead, I slowed down and walked at the water's edge so I could kick at the waves as they rolled ashore. Ginger and I fell farther and farther behind the others. I saw Ethan stop to wait for Ginger and me to catch up. He did not call to us, and I pretended that I did not notice. Ethan waited until Ginger and I were midway between Grandpa, Dad, and Margaret until we were half-pipped. And then I slowed down even more. Dad stopped, called to Ethan, not to me, to catch up. Ethan looked toward Ginger and me, and then toward Grandpa and Margaret, and then waited for another second or two, and then walked fast forward until he caught up with Dad, Grandpa, and Margaret. And on Tuesday evening, we watched a nest hatch. It was one of theirs. Theirs means it was one that Margaret had moved, like the one on the first night of our turtle walks. This one also contained 107 eggs, but this time all 107 turtles emerged. 100%! Grandpa cried, and he hugged Margaret. And then he congratulated Ethan and Dad. Ginger and I stayed on the fringe because I had to hold Ginger on a short leash, so she would not start chasing the baby turtles. Grandpa did not hug or congratulate me. We all returned to Grandpa's apartment, and Dad insisted on taking us all out to the Dairy Queen to celebrate.
I was sitting at poolside reading. After doing our turtle walk, Margaret had gone to her volunteer duties at the garden club, and Grandpa Izzy had gone to his at the public library. Ethan and I were to let ourselves into their condo and start lunch. Ethan finished his laps and came out of the water. He sat at the deep end with his legs dangling into the water. I joined him at the pool's edge and put my feet into the water too. I noticed that he had a key on an elastic cord around his ankle, and I also noticed that he had a keychain ornament that looked like a giant molar. As the daughter of a dental hygienist, I was interested in his keychain ornament and asked where he got it. "From your mother," he said. I was not prepared for his answer. "My mother?" I asked in a voice that was too loud even for the out-of-doors. "Well, yes. Your mother works for Dr. Gershom, doesn't she?" "As a matter of fact, she does." "She cleaned my teeth," he said. There is not a worse feeling in this world than the feeling that someone knows something about you that he has known for almost a whole summer and has kept to himself. Even sharing what he knows about you with others is not as bad as knowing something and not telling you he knows. All you can think about is what he was really thinking the whole time he was speaking to you or walking the beach with you or swimming laps or playing fetch with your dog Ginger. I felt as if I had been spied on. I felt as if I had been stalked. My heart was pumping gallons of blood up to my face. I could feel my neck throb. I controlled my voice so that it would not quiver. I said, "You should have told me that. You should have told me long before now. A person with good manners would have." Ethan said, "I didn't think it was important." I caught my breath and asked an intermediate question. "Does your mother also know Dr. Gershom?" "He's our family dentist." "And Margaret, does she also know him?" "I told you, he's our family dentist. Grandma Draper is part of our family. Before she moved to Florida, he was her dentist too." "Do not adopt that tone with me, Ethan Potter." "What tone?" "The tone of being patient and tolerant as if the questions I'm asking are dumb questions. They're not dumb questions. I need to know what you know that I do not." "I don't know what you don't know, and how can I know what I know and you don't?" "Now that's a dumb question." I don't think so. "Just tell me what you knew about my mother and me and my father before we met." "Okay, I'll tell you what I knew about you if you'll tell me what you knew about me." "All right, you go first." "When your mother said she was divorcing your father and wanted to move to New York where she grew up, my grandmother set things up with Dr. Gershom." "Margaret set what things up?" "The job interview." "Mother's job interview with Dr. Gershom?" "I thought that's what we were talking about, your mother's job with Dr. Gershom." "We are talking about what you know that I do not, and I'm trying to tell you. Your mother told Izzy and Grandma Draper that she wanted to move to New York State, so Grandma set up the job interview with Dr. Gershom. I had stayed in Florida with Dad while Mother had gone north to find a job in a house. No one, not Dad, not Mother, not Grandpa Izzy, no one had told me that Margaret had set up Mother's job interview with Dr. Gershom. Margaret could have. The others should have. No one seemed to think that it would matter to me where I lived. No one seemed to think that it would matter to me whether I spent my life in New York or Florida or commuting between the two. My throat was dry. I took a deep breath of the chlorine-saturated pool air and asked, "Is there anything else you know about me that I don't know?" Ethan shrugged. "Only that Noah was best man at Grandma and Izzy's wedding. The whole world knows that. I am asking you one last time. What do you know about me that I do not know you know?" "Not much. Only that Noah never said what nice guys your dad and Izzy are." "That is what you do not know. I was asking you what you do know." The pulse in my neck was about to break through the skin. I do know that you're pretty mad right now, and I think now you ought to tell me what you knew about me. Nothing. My grandma told you nothing about me? That is correct. She said nothing about you. She did not even tell me that you were coming here, even though she had several opportunities to do so. Ethan then asked a strange question. Did she tell you anything about Luke? Luke what? Lukewarm?
I was going to say exactly the same thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My brother Lucas, called Luke. Did she tell you anything about him? She did not. Ethan smiled, more to himself than to me. Well, he said, we Potters make an art of silence. Your grandmother is a draper. See, he said, grinning. It comes to me from both sides of the family. I did not speak to him for the rest of the day, and when he left the pool to return to the condo for lunch, I did not go with him. I thought that it would do him good to know how it felt to be the recipient rather than the giver of silence.
It was obvious that it was Margaret who had made possible my mother's leaving my father. Margaret Diamondstein, formerly Draper, helped my mother move to New York. She moved turtles from one nest to another. She moved Grandpa Izzy out of Century Village, and now she was helping my father get permitted. And by next turtle season, she will be helping him move to the beach. Margaret Diamondstein, formerly Draper, was an interfering person. I did not need Margaret interfering with my life. I would have nothing more to do with her. That meant no more walking on the beach. That meant no more swimming and breakfast. That meant no more turtle walks. Never. Stop it. Stop it. Sorry, that was the dog. Stop it. Never again a turtle walk. Never. I would stop and never tell her why. Never. Buddy, you are very good, but you can't take things that you're not supposed to eat. I was still at the pool when Dad came to pick me up. I went back to the condo while they all went down to the beach to check on a nest. After I showered and dressed, I watched from the balcony, staying back by the wall where I could not be seen. Ginger whimpered to let me know that she wanted to be down there, but I thought at the very least my dog ought to stay by and on my side. I wanted to leave my father's house. I wanted to go home. To Autumn.
That evening, as we were driving back to Swinging Singles, I asked my father if he knew that Margaret had set up Mother's job interview. I did. I think you could have told me. I didn't think it was important. Why does everyone think they know what's important to me? This was important. This is important. Do you think it's right that you should know and Ethan should know and I should not? All he said was, I didn't know that Ethan knew. I waited for Dad to say something more, to apologize, or simply tell me that I was right, but he did not. Like Ethan, my father had a strong taste for silence. Mother always said, your father is not a communicator. She made that statement more than once, sometimes more than once a day. I was glad that I had made the decision not to go on any more turtle walks, and not to communicate with anyone about my decision.
The following morning, when Dad knocked on my door, I was still undressed. He called through the closed door. Better hurry. I'll be late. I said nothing. He opened the door a crack and said, Nadia? Nadia, are you all right? I'm not going, I said. What's the matter? Don't you feel well? I feel fine. I have decided to stay here. Why? It is not important. Dad waited by the door, waited for me to explain. But I said nothing. I wanted silence to make him as miserable as it had made me. He hesitated, then came into my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and said nothing. He hovered. I struggled with silence till I could not stand it another second, so I said, Did you know that I did a report on turtles last year? Yes. I knew that. You never seemed very interested in turtles when I did my report. I guess I had other things on my mind, Nadia. The pulse in my ears was so strong I hardly heard him. I guess it took an invitation from Margaret to get you interested. Well, partly that, and partly that I had the time. Your child custody time, I said. Dad let out a long sigh and looked so embarrassed that I almost did not say what I was about to say, but I did. I have decided not to spend your child custody time on turtle walks with Margaret and her grandson. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. If you want to take turtle walks, you go ahead and take turtle walks. You can get permitted without me. All you need are turtles and Margaret. I had not only broken my silence, I was almost screaming. Dad looked at his watch. If there is one thing I really detest, it is having someone look at his watch as he is talking to me. It says to me that time spent elsewhere is more important than time spent talking to me. I have an appointment at the office in an hour. He glanced at his watch again. I'm sure it's an important appointment, I said. Yes, it is, he replied. Dad was so preoccupied with time that he did not even notice the sarcasm in my voice. Let me call Margaret to let her know we won't be there. You can go, I said. You go. I wouldn't want you to miss a turtle walk for my sake. It might interfere with your getting permitted. There's no way that I can make it up there and back in time for my appointment. Are you trying to tell me that I've kept you from your turtle walk? Well, no, but yes. He looked confused. What I meant to say is that yes, this conversation has kept me from going on a turtle walk, but no, that isn't what I'm trying to tell you. You know that if it had not been for your unwillingness to go, I would have. He glanced at his watch again. Let me call Margaret. Then we'll have time for breakfast, and we'll talk about it. He started out the door, turned back, and said, I won't tell her why you're not coming. Tell her. I do not care. She knows every other thing about me. Tell her, I said. And do not count on me for breakfast. I do not want any. I turned my back to him and my face to the pillow. The telephone rang in the middle of the morning. I let the recorder get it. It was Margaret, telling me that she would come pick me up if I would call. I did not. Instead, I took Ginger for a walk around the golf course that borders swinging singles. When we returned, I saw that there was a message on the machine. I played it. It was Grandpa Izzy asking me to please call. I erased the message. I sat out by the pool for a while and read, came back to the apartment for lunch, and that is when I ate the breakfast cereal that my dad had put out on the counter in the kitchen. He called while I was eating. I did not pick up the phone then either. After lunch, I took Ginger for another walk, called the airline to see how much it would cost if I changed my ticket to go home early. $35. I watched 3 talk shows on television. One was about teenagers whose mothers flirt with their boyfriends. They were pathetic. Another was about men who said they lost their jobs because they refused to cut off their ponytails. They were pathetic. The third one was about people who pierce weird body parts. One girl had a silver nail ran through her belly button, and another had a diamond stud put in her tongue. One exposed her belly button, and the other stuck out her tongue. The phone rang twice. It was my dad again, sounding worried that I was not answering. Then it was Margaret again, saying that she hoped that we would come over since another nest was due to hatch. I erased all the messages. Not answering the phone, but hearing what people on the other end were saying was a little bit like spying. I enjoyed it.
Dad walked into the apartment looking frazzled. He was looking very much like the unstrung self who had picked me up at the airport. Where were you? He demanded. I have been calling every 20 minutes. I noticed, I said. When he asked me why I had not returned his calls, I said I did not think they were important. I'm taking tomorrow off, he said. What are you going to do? I asked. Hover? What do you mean? Nothing. Nothing is a mean answer, but sometimes nothing works. Sometimes nothing else does. I thought we might go up to Disney World. Used to like Epcot. What will I do with Ginger? I asked. Well, let me find out what accommodations they have for dogs. Just then the phone rang. Dad picked it up. I could tell by the way he was speaking that it was Grandpa Izzy asking if we would be coming over for the evening's turtle walk. When he hung up, Dad asked me if I would like to invite Ethan to come to Disney World with us. I could not believe he was asking me the question. I just stared at him. Well, he said, he seemed to enjoy the Phantom of the Opera so much I thought he might enjoy... I continued to stare at my father and say nothing. He cleared his throat. If you don't like the idea of asking Ethan, would you like to ask one of your friends from the old neighborhood? He was practically pleading with me to ask someone. Without turtles, my father did not know what to do with me. Even though Disney World was only a 2 hours drive from his apartment, Dad had decided it might be more fun if we stayed overnight in one of Disney-themed hotels. He called and got us reservations, and we went to our rooms to pack our overnight bags. There was, that evening, a nor'easter hit the... that evening, a northeaster hit the coast. The winds were 35 miles an hour with gales up to 50. There was coastal flooding, which meant that the low-lying highways and many side roads and ramps would be closed. That meant that the interstates that were normally bumper-to-bumper but moving would be bumper-to-bumper and not moving. Before we went to bed, Dad suggested we avoid rush hour by starting out late in the morning instead of early. The phone rang at midnight. Dad called in to me and said I should pick up the phone. It was Grandpa Izzy. "It's an emergency," he said, pleading. "Our hatchlings will be swept ashore by the winds. We have to harvest them early tomorrow before daylight, before the birds get them. Margaret and I think that you ought to drive up here now so that we can get an early start. Traffic will be impossible in the morning." Grandpa was so sincere, so concerned about the turtles, so convinced that we would answer his 911 that it was obvious Dad had never told him that I had canceled all future turtle walks. I waited to see how Dad would turn him down. Dad did his best thing. He remained silent. Grandpa said, "Nadia, are you there? Are you on the line, darling?" "I'm here, Grandpa." "You know what will happen if we don't gather them up. Can't you come?" Dad and I had plans. "What plans, darling? You don't want the baby turtles to be blown ashore and die, do you? These are babies, Nadia. They need help." Dad and I were going to Epcot. "Why do you want to go there and see Mr. Walter Disney's version of the world when you can see Mother Nature's real thing?" I had to smile. Grandpa Izzy always called Disney World Mr. Walter Disney's version of the world. Then he said, "Margaret and I need your help, Nadia. So do the turtles. Sometimes one species has to help another get settled." Grandpa was apologizing for not telling me about Margaret's meddling. I did not know what to say. Dad finally spoke up. "Let Mother Nature worry about the turtles. They can take care of themselves." But I knew that they could not. I said, "Let me talk to Dad, Grandpa. I will call you back." After I hung up, I went into the living room. Dad was in his pajamas, striped. I had never seen Dad sitting in the living room in striped pajamas. He said, "Don't worry about the turtles, Nadia." I explained. "The turtles will be easy to spot. So out of place, washed up on the shore, the birds will eat them. They couldn't possibly eat all of them. Those that do not get eaten will be lost. But surely the tide will come back and carry the seaweed and the turtles along with it back out." He smiled again. "What comes ashore always washes back out. That's not a philosophical statement, Nadia. It's a fact. They will be lost at sea. Lost at sea, the sea's their home. They will be lost at sea," I repeated. "Nadia," Dad said, "how can that happen?" "You have to understand turtles to understand how that will happen." "I don't think I do." "I told Grandpa I would talk to you." My father sat on the sofa, looking out of place in his striped pajamas. He nodded, a slow, thoughtful nod, and I knew that he would pay close attention, and I knew that I could explain it all. "It all starts," I said, "the minute the new hatchlings scamper over the sand toward the light of the horizon. Once they reach the water, they begin a swimming frenzy. They do not eat. They just swim and swim until they reach the Sargasso Sea. This is where they stop, and that is when Mother Nature turns off the swimming frenzy switch and turns on the graze and grow switch. For the next 5 to 10 years, they will stay in the Sargasso Sea, feeding off the small sea animals that live in the floating mass of Sargasso grass. Tonight, when the wind blows that seaweed ashore, there will be lots of immature turtles in it, swept along with the sea grass they have called home." I paused in my narrative. I focused hard on Dad, and he focused hard on me. "Are you with me?" I asked. My father nodded, so I continued. Here's the tragic part. Even if the tide does wash them back into the water, they will not be able to get back home once the swimming frenzy switch is turned off. It is turned off forever. Turtles do not have an emergency power pack or a safety switch to turn it on. So there they are once again at the water's edge, but this time they're without a mechanism for swimming east, and that is why they'll be lost at sea. They will want to graze. They will have an appetite, but they will not be where they can satisfy it, and they will not know how to get there because they cannot turn back their internal clock. They will not find home. They will not find food. They will starve and grow weak and be eaten. My father did not once look at his watch or the clock or the table by the sofa. His listen and learn switch had been turned on, and his own internal clock was ticking. I studied my father, sitting on the pale gray living room sofa in his blue-striped pajamas. The storm in our private lives had picked him up and put him out of place. Me too. I, too, had been picked up from one place and set down in another. I, too, had been stranded. We both needed help resettling. When Grandpa says that we must harvest the turtles, he means that we must gather them up and save them in buckets. Then we take them to marine land. When the seas calm down, they will be taken 50 miles offshore and placed in the Sargasso Sea. Dad smiled. They need a lift. Ginger rubbed herself against my legs. I stroked her back. Yes, I said, they do. Without another word, we returned to our rooms, Dad and I. We got dressed. When we ran out to the car, the rain was coming down in sheets and the wind was blowing so hard that umbrellas were useless. I held the back door open for Ginger and she hopped in. Dad and I got pretty wet just from that short run to the car, and Ginger sat in the back seat, panting and smelling like the great wet dog she was. The rain battered the car and the wipers danced back and forth, never really clearing the windshield. There were only a few cars in the road. We didn't pass any of them, not only because it was dangerous to do so, but also because we welcomed their red taillights as a guide. Cars coming the other way made spray that splashed over the hood. Dad's hands were clenched on the steering wheel. These northeasters dump rain in squalls that last for miles, and then they let up briefly. During one of the few lulls in the storm, Dad leaned back slightly and asked, "What do the turtles do after they've finished their 5 to 10 years in the Sargasso Sea?" "Then they go to the Azores and become bottom feeders for a few years." And then they grow up. When they're about 25, they mate. The females come ashore and lay their eggs on the same shore where they were born, and immediately return to the sea, not coming ashore again for 2 or maybe 3 years when they're ready again to lay eggs. The males never return to shore. Dad asked, "You left something out, Nadia. They're 10 when they leave the Sargasso Sea, and they're 25 when they mate and lay eggs. What happens during the 15 years between leaving the Azores and mating?" Realization hit me. I laughed out loud. We were riding into a squall again, and Dad was concentrating so hard on driving that I was not sure he was even waiting for an answer. "What is it?" he asked. "Another switch," I said. He took his eyes off the road long enough to demand, "Tell me, what did they do?" "In the years between leaving their second home and their return to their native beaches, they commute. Year after year, all up and down the Atlantic, turtles swim north in the summer and south in the winter. Did you already know that?" I didn't know for sure, but I had my suspicions. I had to smile. "And did you have your suspicions about me?" "For a while," he said. Then he took his eyes off the road long enough to return my smile. "But not now." "Of course," I said. "I will be doing the same, but opposite. I will commute north in the winter and south in the summer." "Yep," he said. "And there will be times when you or I will need a lift between switches." "Yes," I replied. "There will be times."
That is the end of Act 2.